Today is Friday, January 22nd, 2016. My name is Teresa Beer Larson. I am talking with Tom Elbert. And Tom, I'd like to know if I have your permission to record your face and your voice today.
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. Tom, the first question that I ask in a Shared Stories interview is when and where were you born?
I was born in Whittemore, Iowa. That's between Emmitsburg and Algona, and I was born on the 21st day of November in 1923.
So you're just a young man.
Yes, 92.
Tell me what your family did in that part of Iowa at that time.
Well, my father died in 1927. He was a lumberman, and when he passed away, he had a little insurance, and that was what my mother lived on. My dad, when he passed away, the lumber yard had so much on the books that it never benefited her one bit. So the only thing she had was some interest money, which was close, and she knew how to stretch it.
I'm guessing, though, that you and your siblings had to learn how to work hard early.
Boy, from about 12, we were out hustling. We all had jobs. My first job was as I used to pick up and deliver dry cleaning, and I would make 15 cents on the dollar, and I worked out of a barber shop down on Main Street. And I would bring the clothing there and put their name and address on it, and Vaughn cleaners from Emmitsburg would pick it up and then bring it back several days later, and I would take it back out to the customer. My main customers were the teachers. Back in those days, they were using dry cleaning more than the rest of them.
They had a little bit of income.
Yes.
You're also telling me, of course, that you grew up in the Depression.
I sure did.
So you were 4 when your dad passed away.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you described to me one of your first jobs. What were some of the other jobs you had as a young person?
I had a job sweeping out. We had a 2-level school, which was called Presentation Academy, and the janitor hired me to sweep out the bottom floor while he swept the top floor for 50 cents a week. So I made about 10 cents a night on that job. Of course, I had a paper route, and I'm always happy to tell that back in those days, the paper company had the paper deliverer, the person that delivers the paper, always collect. And they move out. It was a poor paper boy that stood the loss, not the paper company. And I remember several times. That would be getting into my later life. Stay with this.
Okay, we'll stay with that.
Yeah.
Are there any other stories from your small town growing up that you'd like to share with me before we move on to how you got to Ames?
Well, yes, I think probably the wonderful opportunities we had to gather together and play games and things. We would gather together maybe on a street corner at about 7 o'clock at night. And we would play, back in those days in Whittemore, they called it arrow hunt. And we would begin by dividing into 2 groups, and one group would hide and the other would try to find them. And I remember this so well that I was on the hiding group. And when you come to the end, they draw a circle and say HNB, which stands for hid nearby. And they said, we're going up to the top of that elevator. And I said, oh boy, I'm not going up there. I'll hide down here someplace. And they said, you don't hide down here. If you don't go up to the top of the elevator, you go home. So I screwed up my courage and I went up there to the top of the elevator. But the scary part about it was they just nailed cleats so you could put your hands as you were going up. And about every 6 feet, there was a 2x6 that went around. And you just grasped that, and that was the scary part because you didn't have that same clutch that you did on the. So we got to the top of the elevator, and I remember my brother Bill had just gotten a 5-cell flashlight, and doggone if he didn't see us somebody in the window up there, and they came up and caught us. So, and then we had a coasting hill that we would go to. We had a 55-gallon drum that we cut the top and bottom out of, and some holes on the bottom so it would get air. And then we would all bring wood, coal, or something like that and we'd slide down the hill and get warm around the fire. Those are just some of the games that we played that the kids today don't have the opportunity to do that.
There would probably be some safety regulations that would keep them from
Yes,
exploring
I think so.
in that way.
So, yeah.
Tell me how your family got to Ames, Iowa.
Well, my brother had graduated from high school in 1939, and he wanted to study mechanical engineering, and that of course led us to Ames. And on October the 29th, 1939, we moved to Ames and lived on the corner of 101 North Russell and Lincoln Way. And whenever, later on when I graduated from high school in 41, if we wanted to go to the college we would walk out to the curb and we would get a ride out. And then when we're coming home, we would go down to Lynn and Lincoln Way, and people would always stop and pick you up and bring you back. So we never paid anything for transportation.
When you came to Ames in 1939, of course your brother was going to go to Iowa State University, but you were still in public school.
Yeah, it was 1939 was the first year that now the City Hall was opened as a high school, and I entered there as a junior, and that was the first year that Ames High was in that area. So I opened up the Ames High down on where the City Hall is.
Was that a hard transition?
Oh boy, I came from a class of 13 to a class of 300. That was culture shock, not hard, just plain culture shock. And I don't think anybody paid much attention to me. I remember at the time I wasn't smart enough to know that I could get counseling at the high school. So I tried to pick out the subjects I thought that I would need, and I was never really very good in math. So later on, when I was thinking about going to college, I tried to pick something that didn't have a lot of math in it.
So at Ames High, at the end of the Depression years, can you describe to me what it was like to go to this new high school? Was it shiny, glistening, big? Just put it in your words. What it was like.
It was enormous to me. We had a home room, which was totally unknown to me, and we would move about for classes, which was totally unknown to me. And they had fire squad in the hall to keep people from running through the hall. It was students that wore a red band, and they called them the fire squad. And there was we had at the time we had a field house down where the strip mall is for Hy-Vee and Hobby Lobby in that area. And for physical ed, we would go out of the gym and run down there and play outside, probably touch football or other games that we played when we ran down there. I can't remember. Maybe just did calisthenics. But the field house was there. It was a round building and finally disappeared.
And there were athletic contests there. I mean, the kids who were out for athletics would have games there as well. Basketball games.
But they were not. They had the high school, so they had the gym, and the Ames High basketball team played in the existing gym at the City Hall. Yes, mm-hmm. but there were intramural games down there at the field house and mm-hmm. outside too in the summertime. Well, spring and fall.
You've mentioned a little bit about the classes that you took at Ames High. When you started in 1939, do you remember thinking that the English classes were challenging or the other things that you were challenging, or did you feel like you were fairly well prepared coming from Whittifor?
I could have been prepared better. I could remember we studied. I think in my junior year we studied English literature, and it was studying Chaucer and Shakespeare, and that was quite an event for a small town kid. But anyway, it was interesting, and I can still remember some of the phrases that we had in it was called English literature. Yeah.
So the classwork was pretty challenging. That would keep your mind going. What about fun times? Now, we'll get to your jobs because I'll bet you had to work even though you'd come to Ames. But what were the fun things that high school kids did?
Oh, I don't. Well, Friday night we'd go to a basketball game or a football game, and the football field was just east of the field house down where I go to play bridge, Heartland, where Heartland is, and that was built later because that was a football field, and then later on that was until they moved up to where they are now. That was the football field for Ames High, and as far as the only things I participated in were things that perhaps that I could use a study hall for, like was Boys Glee Club, and boy, the rest of the time when I left school, I had a job. I must tell you about what we first did when I got here was on Saturday we would go out to the YMCA in the college, and people from Ames would call in with jobs to rake the leaves or put on storm windows. We'd get jobs that way. And then for a while I worked at Fairway Grocery, and they put me slicing bacon. And they had a machine that wasn't automatic. You just turn the wheel and take the bacon and put it on a piece of paper, and turn the wheel and put it on a piece of paper. And you put a pound of bacon on a piece of paper, and then you put it in the back room in the cooler so they could get it when they needed for the showcase. But I'll tell you, I didn't eat bacon for years.
Not your favorite job.
I asked to be removed from there and made a stock clerk, and they did. They put me out on it. But that was so much easier. That standing for 8 hours and doing that was more than I could tolerate.
So when you came to Ames and you were in high school, you went to school during the day, and pretty much you had a job every afternoon when you left school.
Yes. Yeah, later on I got a job at St. Cecilia's. That was in the summer. I came in 39. That would have been the summer of 40. And I had a job in mowing the lawn. And that was all. And in 41, I graduated in May, I still had that job because I would shovel the walks in the winter. And boy, that was a lot of shoveling too, but we didn't have any snow blowers. But what was I going to say?
You were saying about working at St. Cecilia's.
Yeah, in 41, that summer, I painted every room in that schoolhouse with a 4-inch brush. That was the days before the rollers. And you see that most kids today wouldn't be that responsible, I don't think. But we had a 4-letter word. They call it work, and we were pretty good at that.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me about Ames High before we move on from that little era of your life?
No, I think that's probably about all. We used to, of course, I lived at 101. I would, during my sophomore year, I rode my bike to school, home for lunch, and back to school and home after that. But I got too sophisticated in my senior year. I would walk. But I met Bernie Sills, who lived up on 2nd Street, and we would walk together home for lunch and back to school. And so we had, poor Bernie's gone now, but he was a great friend.
You had to deal with the railroad tracks.
Yeah, we crossed them. We would go down the St. 5th Street and go over down that street and down the hill and across the tracks. And probably illegal.
But that was the quick way home.
Yeah, it was.
You did well enough in high school to go on to Iowa State College. It was called Iowa State College at that time.
Entered in the fall of '41 at Dairy Industry, and I stayed at Iowa State for 4 quarters before I left for the Army in January 1943. I was discharged in December 1945, almost 3 years exactly. I was exactly 2 years to the day overseas without getting home or having any communication with home.
I want to talk about your World War II experience in just a second, but thinking about you going into dairy industry reminded me of a story that you had told me earlier, and I hope you'll tell me it again, about why you learned to drink coffee rather than a lot of milk. And can you tell me that story again?
Sure. To begin with, I decided one day that I would like to have a bag swing. That's
now this is back when you were
back at home as a kid. Yeah,
as a kid.
So I filled a bag with straw and tied the top of it, and there was a branch up high that I climbed the tree and tied it on, and then I got a 8-foot step ladder and moved it back far enough so that I could jump off the top of that 8-foot step ladder and get a real exhilarating swing. So it was so much fun for me that I called my brother Bill and said, "Bill, come on, try this. Boy, this is really fun." Well, the rope I had gotten was out of the garage and it was rotten, and so when he jumped his extra weight, he came down and broke his leg. And I remember they took him to Fort Dodge to set the leg, and they brought him home, and the doctor said, "You'll have to figure out a way to get a whole milk for this child." So it was my job then to ride my bike about 3 miles down to the Herman Boss farm, and morning and evening, and I had that job to pick up that milk until we left. Well, that wasn't what you asked me something different.
Oh, just because about coffee.
Oh, so when we were ready to move to Ames, I was a milk drinker, and my mother said, "I don't think I can afford to buy you milk. When we go to Ames, you'll have to learn to drink coffee." That's the story.
Because it was just kind of expensive to do that. Yeah. I just want to touch briefly on your World War II experience. Thank you for your service. You, it was a tough time you had.
Well, but it was I had a very interesting job. I was in the information center of the fighter operations wing. I was in the Signal Corps, attached to the 5th Air Force, and whenever we made a push on the islands, we went in, generally on D+1 behind the 24th Infantry Division. So, but as soon as we got the Japanese pushed back from the shore, we would set up our radars, and they would move out to the hinterlands, and we set up the information center. And in the information center, we had a gridded map, which we had prepared prior to the time of moving into the area. And there were plotters, people with headsets, and they would hear from the platoons, from the radar, all the aircraft that were in the air, and they would plot them on the plotting board. And then there was a filter and there was azimuth sweeps on it. And so that when 2 or more radars would report on an aircraft, the plotter would put the arrow down where the lines converged. And then when the plotter first discovered it, was first called, he would put a stand on the table and a thing on the side which would indicate how many planes, 3 or 4, maybe 1. A lot of times we had what we called Wash Machine Charlie come over every night and bomb.
So you got back to the United States when?
October of 1945. Coming underneath that Golden Gate, there was a dry eye in the group.
It probably moves you to this day. Felt good to be home?
Sure does. Yes.
When you got back home, did you go right back to Iowa State College?
No, I got back in December, and I didn't do anything. We had we got paid, I think, for a certain number of months, a couple of months. And at that time, my brother came home from somewhere, I don't know, he heard that they were hiring temporary people at the post office. And he said, now you might want to go there and earn some money for next fall's tuition. And he said, I think they pay pretty well. It's $1.04 an hour. So I said, yeah, I'd like that. So I had already gotten my letter of eligibility to go back to college, but I thought I'd be, doing what I did before, working in janitor stuff. But at any rate, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, we were just talking about you were getting paid $1.04 an hour.
Oh, at the post office, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so it was a case of, so I was hired, and he told me I'd have to come to work at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I said, gosh, that's the middle of the night. And he said, yeah, you can be a carrier if you want to be. And I said, oh, I'd like to be a carrier. But he says, the thing of it is, when you start, you're a substitute and you fill in on both crafts, both the carrier and the clerk craft. So he said, we'll have you come at 4 in the morning, and your job will be to dump parcels, and you'll learn where to put those parcels for delivery throughout the city. So we did that, and the mail was hauled up from the depot. All the mail was brought in from either the west or the east on it was Chicago Northwestern then, not the UP. And there was a mail hauler that would bring the mail up, and he'd throw the mail on the trucks that we'd bring it in and dump it on the floor, and then we would dump the sacks. We did this every morning. And when we were through, about 8 o'clock, we'd go out for breakfast and come back, and maybe some carrier would decide he wanted the rest of the day off, so they would give us the mail for that route. And I remember the first day I carried mail was up Ridgewood and Brook Ridge. And he didn't tell me that he hadn't thumbed the mail. Thumbing the mail is putting it in order. And usually 3 houses are placed within one division. So like 101, 107, 111. And so the first house I went to, I delivered the mail, and then I went to the second house, and I went back to the first house, and I went to the third house, and I went to the first house.
And you learned very quickly what thumbing the mail meant.
Yes.
So how long were you in that temporary position?
I think I was, I tell you, it was about 2 years to the day after that I finally got on as a regular employee. And how I remember that after I started, but it couldn't have been too long. Wait a minute, Pearl Clayton came by. She was the civil service secretary at the time, and said, Tom, you ought to write this civil service to get on at the post office. That's the way you get on. So I did. And fortunately, I came out near the top, and I was the first one on after the war. So there hadn't been any, as far as, back in those days, seniority was the thing that made a lot of difference. So I thought that was pretty good, and I didn't go back for a year, and I thought I'll go back next year. I had that in mind for a while, and then I decided no, I wouldn't. And I must tell you though that that first day that I went out to carry mail, it was April 3rd, 1946, and I had on a raincoat and a hat, and it was cold outside, but and it was raining, and I was sweating on the inside, and I came in from the route, and I went in the superintendent of mail's office, and I said, change my description. I don't want to be a carrier. I want to be a clerk.
I wanted to ask you, because of your long experience at the Ames Post Office, what kinds of things were delivered? What things went through the mail, like in the early 1940s, the mid 1940s when you started?
Of course, there were letter mail, and back in those days there was twice a day delivery. Yeah, and the routes were smaller so that the carrier could take, when he came in after carrying most of the mail in the morning, he would come in and bring out only the first class letters that had been arrived and worked in the interim, and he would take those out in the afternoon. So what happened was I'd come in at 4 in the morning and dump parcels and maybe carry her out in the morning, carry her out in the afternoon, and then they need somebody to go out and make collections. So that was, they called them the 4 and 5 o'clock collections. So we made trips to the college and just some of the outlying mailboxes that were, in the main thoroughfares. Mm-hmm. And we didn't pick all the carrier boxes up, but we picked up some of them. And we would bring that mail in, and that mail would be worked to go out that day. And
those days,
and then I would have to, when I get done with bringing it in, then they would want help. So I don't know how many days I spent from 4 a.m. till 10 p.m.
My goodness.
working. And I remember I got sick, and the superintendent of mails called me in and he says, "I don't think you're very healthy." And I said, "My God, you're working me from 4 in the morning till 10 at night. What do you expect?"
Tell me a little bit about, you said there's first class mail, and you said that you were dumping packages, and we live in a university town. Did that affect the kind of things that came through the post office?
Oh yeah. Back in those days, there weren't any laundries around, and the students would mail. There were laundry bags, and the students would mail their laundry home, and their parents would wash it and mail it back to them. So we had mountains of laundry bags. That's why we had such a mountain of parcels. So at any rate, back in those days, everything was sacked, regardless of whether it was fragile or not. So we always had a pretty good backlog of claims.
You taught me a little bit about what it means to case the mail. Now, what you describe for our viewers and listeners, what it means to case the mail.
Case the mail, you're talking about carriers, or are you talking about sorting mail for dispatch?
Either one.
Okay, we'll start with the carriers, because the carriers have divisions that probably are about 1.5 inches, and they case 3 residents in each one of those.
And by case, there's this huge wooden thing on the wall with lots of slats.
They have a series of 4 series of slots for letter mail, and then the top are usually 2, and they're divided into sections, so they have to hand separate those. But if the carriers, when they would pull their mail, they wouldn't thumb it until they were out on the route. So, but the cases were big, and then we had then we had a 40-hour week, and we had what we call rotating carriers that would carry the route that was empty for the day. So they carried a different route every day. We had one man that was Bob Birchtold. It was terrific. He would help all the subs and put up his mail and another thing, to put levity in it, we might go up and give somebody a kiss.
But so now let's talk about the when you had to know where all the rail.
Oh, that was after
depots were.
Yeah, after I made regular, I chose not to work in the morning, but to work from 1 to 10 in the afternoon, which gave me a chance to build this house. Because I get up at 6 in the morning and work till noon and take the kids over to Crawford School they'd walk home and I'd have lunch ready for them because Eleanor was working. And I'd take them to school in the morning and I'd have lunch ready for them at noon and take them back to school, and then I'd go to work at 1 o'clock.
And what was that work like? What did you do?
That was dispatching mail on the trains. And the mail is brought in and dumped on a big sorting table, and it's sorted according to small letters and legal size, small envelopes and legal size envelopes, and then run through a casting machine with the date and the city on it back in those days. And then it's taken from off the casting machine over to the prime case. Okay, down here, this was a local slot. If you got any mail as you were sorting, this would be the local. This was East Directs and West Directs, and the RPO was, what's the RPO over here? Yeah. And then we would have Des Moines zoned, Des Moines unzoned, Chicago zoned, Chicago unzoned, and almost like Milwaukee. We would have some of the bigger towns, Detroit, Milwaukee, New York, Philadelphia, and some states. But some states were thrown to the West Directs, and some states were thrown to the East Directs. And they were taken out of these holes and taken over to the other cases where there would be Iowa towns west of Ames. Sometimes you would dispatch mail up in the northern Iowa because the train would take it over to Carroll, and there's a diagonal train that picked it up there and took it back up to Forest City and up in through there. And then we had trains coming through that went straight up to Minneapolis it was Des Moines, Minneapolis, and Chicago, Sioux City, and Chicago, Merritt, and Omaha ran through central Iowa, but south of here. And then Chicago and Omaha was the one train that ran directly through Ames. And in the RPO case, that's interesting because the RPO case is all the small towns in Iowa that don't have enough mail to make up a tie-out. And the RPO case is, in order to work the RPO case, you had to learn about 1,200 towns in the state of Iowa, and whether they were junctions or not. And the fact that they were junctions meant that they had two railroads, one direction and one the opposite direction.
You had to memorize a lot.
Yeah, we did. But we always had a map directly overhead, so if we lost one, we could pull it down and take a reading on it. But all of these, I can't see them, but that's generally what's in here.
Okay. So all this mail came in, and it was dumped, and you're putting it in the prime case. How long would it take you to get all those bundles done?
Well, it would come in at 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Those are the collections. And so we had a dispatch at 6. So we always made it a game. We tried to do as many letters, get as many letters out as we possibly could. And the average amount of mail that an individual could sort was about 60 letters per minute. And I was blessed. I had a little more dexterity, and I could throw 65 or 70.
Goodness.
But I've always been handy with my hands, so I guess I was blessed. And then after I learned all the towns in the state of Iowa and their junctions, then I got to be the clerk that worked the RPO case almost continuously every afternoon. So. And then at 6 o'clock, we would tie out all the mail, and we used to have a can nailed to the leg of the case. Then we had brown twine, like binder twine, spools about that big around, and that would be in there. And then we had little ring knives that you put on your little finger, and you tie this up and this way, and you tie it with your finger, and then cut it off, and it really went fast. So you tied out all the mail, and the first class mail went in pouches, and those are locked with a lock. And of course there's registered mail, and when you had registered mail, you had to go to the register room just before you locked out the pouch. And sometimes they would give you a pouch with a rotary lock on it, which had registered mail in it. And then you would put that in, but you'd have to have a manifest of all the registers that you had, and you would put that in the pouch, and the receiving clerk on the train would open it and receipt you and send you the receipt back for the registered mail. Interesting, the persons on the train, we would sort the mail for Iowa, like say through central Iowa. We had trains going east and trains going west. We'll try to do east first. We would have a slot for what we called East 1. That would take the towns within a certain range, probably about 35, 40 miles, that had to be opened and worked first. And then we had a East 2, which would probably go from Toledo over to maybe past Cedar Rapids, and East 3 would be from there on over to Clinton. And so every train had those divisions so that the RPO clerk on the train would know that he had to pick up that number 1 bundle and work it before he got to the others.
So you're saying that there was somebody on the train then working those bundles as the train was going along?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and after the demise of the train, we had a highway post office that used to come in, and it was a great big bus with just a driver in the front and the mail room in the back. And that ran between Des Moines and Minneapolis and back. And we used it for a while. And then eventually, as the trains disappeared and the highway post offices disappeared, the nickname for the highway post office was Hypo. And then we would just merely sack the mail and send it to the Des Moines MSC Section Center, which means Management Sectional Center, and they would work it. Back in those days, then, that was the beginning of the machines. The operator would sit behind the machine.
And what time period? I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom. About what time did those machines come in? Can you remind me?
I can't.
Okay, sorry.
The time escapes me.
Yeah.
But LSMs, they called them, letter sorting machines. I was trying to think of that.
Yeah.
And they would have their letter passed directly in front of them, and they could work considerably more than. But it was a very tiring job because you'd
repetitive,
have to be constantly on your top nerve reading the addresses on it. So the next improvement came out over the what do they call those zip mail translators. So after we had zip codes, then they would read the zip codes and all they would have to do is read the 5-digit zip codes. Later on, they added 4 more digits to the zip code, and that meant that the mail coming in would be directed in a bundle directly to a carrier's case for a certain part of the route. So then, as far as parcels are concerned, parcels were outgoing parcels were accepted at the window and were separated in big bags, but they had strings. We didn't lock those. They had strings that you pull and lock with a hand lock. And but we put all the fragiles and everything else in those bags. And like I said before, we had a lot of claims because of that. And then the post office gave away the parcel business to.
Yeah, have a drink.
To the brown trucks.
What were your thoughts when Ames stopped canceling its mail with its own postmark? Do you have any thoughts about that, one way or the other? Did it make you happy or sad?
I had been removed from. Then why I had been removed? I chose to be removed. So I had one time after I had worked this, I went on the night shift. In the meantime, I had that job as civil service secretary, and I was giving tests for clerk typists and for college entrance examinations. and on Saturday morning, and then I took Monday afternoon off, which was really nice. So I went on the night shift as a supervisor. Wrote the supervisory test and went on the night shift as a supervisor, and I hated the night shift. I hated the night shift. I ate too many meals, and I had a great big pot belly on me. And finally, I had a chance to move from the clerk supervisor to the carrier supervisor, and I'm sure the carriers took me on with a lot of trepidation, because just the feeling that they had. Here's this guy that's never been anything but a clerk. How's he going to teach us or anything about being a carrier? So I worked hard on that, and I got them to come around, and I never got a grievance all the time. Well, I was supervisor of the carriers, then I moved up to assistant superintendent of mails, and then finally to superintendent of mails. During my time as superintendent of mails, I never had a grievance, but I had bunches of them come in and talk to me that what they wanted, this, that, and the other. And when the carrier comes in to carry his route, he rings onto the clock, and this is office time. He cases his mail, and when he goes out on the route, he hits the clock, and this is route time. And when he comes in, he goes off route time back onto office time. And then every year we do what they call a 6 weeks time card analysis. So we would figure out the carriers that were having excess time. But I know that some of them worked like the dickens when they went out, so they could come in early. And if it was a rainy day or something, they would come in and not ring in until the time. And I had this in the back of my mind. And so when they would come in hell-bent for some changes, I had that, and I'd say, well, you know, the street goes both ways. I know you guys come in and don't ring in, and on the 6 week time card analysis, I could load you up with a lot of mail. And I said, now let's be fair, and I always talked him out of it.
So let's return to the idea of someone leaves a letter in the Ames post office, and it used to be that it would be canceled in Ames and then go right back out to Ames. Do you ever miss that idea, or were you glad that Des Moines kind of took that over?
I wasn't any of. I had no
feeling one
control over it, and not a lot of feeling.
Okay, good.
Because I wasn't working the mail then. I was out of it. I was in the supervisory chain, and you get away from that. And I don't know how they would have felt, but I think there would have been a loss. If I'd have been still dispatching mail and sorting mail. But see, the transition from hand sorting mail to the letter sorting machines had taken some of that away, and so it was a lot more efficient to send the mail to Des Moines and let them work them on letter sorting machines. Yeah.
When you were supervisor of carriers, did you have any customer dealings? I mean, did you have any mail carriers that were bit by dogs, or?
Oh my, yes. Yes, and there were another one of my collateral jobs was to handle dog bites and to handle car accidents. And so we had one carrier one day, got in his Jeep and drove right into the, right across from South 3rd. There used to be a Walnut motel, and it was a little one. And he got in his car and he drove right into the hotel. So he called, and I was glad because I was able to go down. And because there's so many things you have to consider: who owns the car, who owns the insurance, who was the driver, what you can figure out for marks on the street or skid marks or anything like that. So if I went out myself, then I could get it. So I told the carriers, if you have an accident, please call me immediately, and I'll come out and I'll drop what I'm doing and come out and take the load off your shoulders on that. Dog bites. I have to think of one that I called, the dog bit the carrier, and I called the person, and he was nasty, and he said, sue me, and I said, thank you, I will. So I sued him in small claims court, and he didn't show up, so it wasn't by default. But I usually ask them to pay for the office visit of the doctor's call and maybe some, what do you call that, pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some pain and suffering. I can't remember, but there was a scale that, depending upon the viciousness of the bite, that
Right.
you add the pain and suffering in.
Well, you, on the one hand, you had a very serious job in managing how mail goes in and out of the Ames post office. But there must have been some funny times that occurred too. Can you think of?
Well, I can think of one time that one of the carriers was delivering mail, and he it was the Democratic precinct captain, and of course he'd helped the postmaster get his job, and of course all the postmasterships in those days were political. Now they're not. They've changed that considerably, but they were all political, and so the carrier didn't have any mail for this man's house. And so he didn't go to the house. He might not have even seen the mail that he had out. But he was madder than a hatter, and he called in, and I said, well, I'd like to help you, but there's not much I can do because the carrier does not have to come pick up your mail if he doesn't have any mail for the house. So he grumbled and slammed up the phone. And at any rate, Bud Beeman was postmaster at the time, and he came out and he said, did you talk to John Judge? And I said, yeah. And he said, Kenny forgot to pick up the mail. I said, he doesn't have to pick up the mail if he doesn't have any mail for the house. He said he didn't have any mail for the house. So, anyway, Bud sent a vehicle out to pick up the mail. And another funny thing was we were going to, I used to have to establish rural routes. And we also mail on the post within the city. So that was one of the things that could have been done with the third and fourth class post offices if we could have closed them. But you can't close the post office when the congressmen and the senators are fighting you against it because they have one of their people ensconced in the post office as postmaster, where they put up a few box sections and sell a few stamps during the day and make about $20,000 a year. Back in those days, that was a good salary. Mm-hmm. Not today, but back in those days it was. Then there was we started to deliver in the city. We started to deliver mail on post rather than go house to house. And Johnny Orr lived out on just off of Garfield. You make a right turn. And there was Mazzatelli was a college prof that built two duplexes on the north side of the street, and then they filled them with students, and they all had cars, so you never could get to the mailboxes. So the carrier was complaining. I said, bring it in, just don't deliver it. So I got, being the superintendent of mails, I got all the complaints too from deliveries. And so I get a call and they'd say, I didn't get my mail. I said, well, there were so many cars parked in front of those post office mailboxes, or your mailbox, that the carrier couldn't get, and he's not allowed to dismount anymore. You've got to straighten that out. Well, Johnny Orr lived directly across the street, and Johnny called me, and he was madder than a hatter too. And I said, I didn't call him Johnny. I said, well, Mr. Orr, it's just a case of there's too many cars parked in front of your street. You can come down and get your mail in general delivery, or you can rent a box downtown or at the station, and until we get something else figured out. Eventually, we got boxes on post. You may have seen them, much like a box in an apartment house, and the carrier loads them from the back side, and each have. Then we could stop the vehicle and go load. Probably they came in 8, 12, and 16s. Mm-hmm. So
that was the solution.
Yeah, we finally found a solution.
Was Coach Orr happier then?
Yes, I'm sure he was.
Good. I really appreciate you talking about your craft, because nowadays, in this year, 2016, most people, particularly young people, only think about communication with digital means, the internet,
Yes.
or maybe texting by their phone. And they probably have no idea how many people and how much time goes into getting paper from one place to another. So I really want to thank you for sharing that
Can
with
I
me.
add one more thing?
Please do.
Back in those days, all newspapers and magazines mailed within the county were mailed county free. Library books were mailed for 4 cents for the first pound, 1 cent for each additional pound. If you and I were going to mail books, we had to pay 4 cents for the first pound. No, it was 8 cents for the first pound and 4 cents for each additional pound. And then all the franking privileges that the men had in the
Congress?
Congress, yes. And it was no wonder that the post office ran in the red. It was. I don't know if. And then we had rural route. You certainly don't deliver rural routes and make any money on that. That's a big loser. So, which was also another thing that I didn't mention. The rural carriers were, back in my day, were all political, and they were assigned by the precinct captains. And when we checked the routes of city carriers, we would look for MSC, with Management Sexual Center in Des Moines, would look and assign us a week they thought was a light week. But we always checked the rural carriers on the first day, or right when school was starting in September, and all the mail was coming in, and the rural carriers could come in and case their mail and go out, deliver it, and come in, and when they were through, they could go home, and nobody checked on them or anything like that. It was an unfair situation, and I think the carriers, the city carriers, who were out in all the weather and everything else, I always thought they should have been able to retire at 55, so that that was hard on them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did think of one other question that I wanted to ask you. I think about holiday times and times when it really was a heavy mail sack. What were the heavy times that you guys had to deal
Well,
with?
Christmas, Valentine's. Valentine's was a lot of mail, but I think the different parts of the city made a great deal of difference. Like all the fraternities and sororities, they were carried before we got vehicles. They were carried, in case, I remember Herb Anton carried a satchel on one side and a satchel on the other side, and to carry out the mail for the fraternities and sororities.
Because at one address, there might have been
A great
40 kids
number,
and
yeah,
a lot
right.
of newspapers and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
So,
And I always say at the end of a conversation, is there anything else you'd like to tell me about your long experience with the Ames Post Office that I haven't thought to ask you?
well, I think I spent 39 years there. I started as a temporary employee and stayed for 39 years. And it gave me the fact that I went into the supervisory chain, increased my wages, and gave me a nice retirement. And so I've been very comfortable in my retirement.
Well, thank you for sharing your stories with us, Mr. Tom Elbert. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You're sure welcome. I enjoyed it too.